And even though I got the crap kicked out of me, there was part of me that loved it. And so I loved not completely going off the rails, but I loved taking it all the way to the edge to where it felt like it was about to, and then I kept it together.
Thank you so much for joining me on Owning Your Legacy. It's really an honor to have you on set today.
This is the most comfortable podcast set I've ever been in my entire life.
Probably the most feminine one, too.
It's very feminine.
So, Kevin, if you don't mind, can you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. I'm Kevin Boehm. I am the co-founder of both BOKA Restaurant Group and of Beyond, which is a private club here in Chicago.
I'd love to start with you sharing your story, because I think your childhood story and how you grew up and how you got to where you are is very interesting.
You want me to go all the way back?
I do. I do.
Well, I was born in Flint, Michigan, which I keep in my bio because it gives me some street cred. Yeah. It's a rough city. My mom, going back a little bit further, was one of 14 kids who grew up on a farm. Was part of the farm labor at age 6, getting up at 4:30 in the morning. So I think that's where I got my work ethic from. Totally. The one thing she did not like in people was lazy people. So that was instilled in me from a young age. I grew up in Springfield, Illinois. My mom worked for Montgomery Ward. My dad worked for a small insurance company and had nothing to do with the food business. Mm-hmm. But there was something about me that was very social from a very young age.
Surprising.
There you go. But my family was not social. Nobody ever came over to the house. Very quiet upbringing. And I wanted kind of the exact opposite. So I think I was intrigued about restaurants for that reason, that it kind of seems like you threw a party every night and everybody kind of messed it up and you cleaned it up and then you did it again the next day, which is actually not that far from the truth. And so I told my parents at 10 that I wanted to own my own restaurant, but never really thought about it seriously until I went to University of Illinois, and, started to think, well, maybe I just chose being a lawyer, out of fear disguised as practicality. Mm-hmm. And that I kind of came to that thought, at about age 19. And so at 19 years old, I packed up my Jeep and drove to Florida to go work at a restaurant.
Wow. Brave.
I don't think of it as brave. I'll tell you why. Because at 19, and I just said, well, if this doesn't work, I'll just come back and I'll go to college again, which was absolutely the truth. I think it's brave to do that. If quitting your job when you have a wife and 3 kids, that's true. Brave. I think at 19 years old, it was, I wanted adventure and I wanted to be doing something that I actually was connected to emotionally. Mm-hmm. I was a moron at that point, but I knew that. And so, love took me to Florida, trying to find love.
Mm-hmm. And your mom was supportive of that?
She was. And, and I get down there and, it didn't go well when I first got down there. I ended up homeless, actually. I couldn't get a job at a restaurant. I ended up working at an amusement park. I moved in with a guy who worked at the amusement park, caught him stealing from me, got in a fist fight, ended up living in my car. I heard a comedian say once, the first time that you live in your car, you think this is going to make a really good book someday. Yeah. The second time you live in your car, there's probably not going to be a book. So I only lived.
Get out of the car?
Yeah, I only lived in my car once. I wrote a fake resume. I went to the most fine dining restaurant in town, and I talked myself into a job.
That's
kind of how it all started. And so I think there's this moment in life for a lot of people where they finally find their people. I never found my people in Springfield, Illinois, and I never really found my people, even though I had a good time at University of Illinois. And when I walked into a restaurant for the first time, and I worked those first few shifts, I was like, okay, these people are fucking dangerous.
Yeah, I love that.
But they were also they were smart. They were interesting. They knew a lot about food and wine and culture and film and music. And they were dangerous, and they stayed out till all hours of the night.
I read when you said something along the lines of, if you've had a lot of trauma in your life, restaurants are kind of the perfect place for you. And I'd love you to expand on that a little because I think
Yeah,
I kind of get it.
I had a rough childhood in some ways, and I've saw a lot of people in restaurants that had also had rough upbringings, and what was interesting is those kind of people who'd had real trauma in their lives, when they got like a 20 plate pickup, or they got triple sat in the dining room, they were like, whatever. All it did was like, give me some adrenaline to get into the weeds
And make me feel alive. Probably.
Make me feel alive. So there was a Sunday night. It was Mother's Day, and our restaurant was dead on Sundays. But the manager forgot that it was Mother's Day. We walked in. There were only 3 servers, and we had 200 covers on the book. It was the busiest I've ever been since then. The busiest I've ever been. Yeah. And I got
Couldn't
crushed
you
that
phone
night.
a friend and like bring some more people in?
We tried to bring more people in. We couldn't get any more people in. I ran like a 16-table station all night. And even though I got the crap kicked out of me, there was part of me that loved it. Mm-hmm. And so I loved not completely going off the rails, but I loved taking it all the way to the edge to where it felt like it was about to, and then I kept it together. Yeah. That was kind of my happy place back then. I don't like doing that anymore.
Right.
But that 19-year-old kid, that 20-year-old kid, that's kind of what I loved. I loved the action. Mm-hmm. And in restaurants, I got it. Yeah. So I was only unhappy when it was slow. Right. I wanted to be busy, and I wanted pace and volume and.
Mm-hmm. So then go back to where you were. So you're in Florida for a while, and then you end up getting the job that, you had to kind of make some white lies about to get the job, which is brilliant.
All restaurants that had gone out of business, so they couldn't call for references.
Right.
So, but I started to do well there. Even though I wasn't technically smart, emotionally, I connected with guests, and I was getting call tables, and then I slowly started to pick up the technical knowledge, keeping your body open to the guest and serving from, with the left hand from the left side and all the little technical things. And I was like, I'm in the right place. This is where I'm supposed to be. And so I made a very intentional plan then to get another job and live off everything I made off that second job and save everything I made off of the job at night. And I was like, in theory, eventually I'll have enough money to open up a restaurant, which wasn't untrue, even though it seemed like a pretty naive plan. And I lived in squalor. I didn't have a bed for a little while. I slept on a couch, and I had a passbook savings account. And for all of those who are too young to know what that is, you would go in and they would stamp your balance, and I had a little book, and I had a number in mind. And when I hit that number, I quit my jobs. I didn't tell anybody what I was doing, except for my girlfriend at the time. And my girlfriend and I went to Seaside, Florida, which has since then become pretty well known. It's a road called 30A, and there's Rosemary Beach and Alice Beach and Seaside. And
by Destin, isn't it kind of close?
Yeah, it's near Destin, but it's this little road called 30A, and they filmed the Truman Show there. That was the first. And so I opened a restaurant.
Spring break last year, I took an RV to Destin.
Oh, there you go.
And we camped right on the water. Well, it was close to Destin. It was in between Pensacola and Destin, but pulled it right up to the beach, and it was so fun.
They're beautiful, white sand beaches.
Yeah.
And, my girlfriend at the time had said, I want to show you something. We drove out there. Then in the middle of nowhere is like, you come upon Alice in Wonderland. And it's like, what the hell is this? And I remember having dinner there, and I was trying to impress her, and I took her to this fancy restaurant there. And we get in there, and it was only 6 tables. It was called Josephine's Bed and Breakfast. Mm-hmm. And it was, guiridons and tuxedos and this fancy restaurant. And there was a guy in there, the table right next to us, that was hammered. And he, the whole room was looking over at this table because he was interrupting their nice dinner. Mm-hmm. And I was like, crap. And when we got down and sat down, the maitre d' handed me the menu, and he winked at me. And when I opened up the menu, there was a Post-it note inside, and it said, "Dear Mr. Boehm, the guy on your left is an asshole. He will be gone soon. Please bear with us until then.
And if not, we will escort him out."
Yeah, thank you. Love, Bruce. And that was this maitre d' named Bruce Albert. And he was the first person who ever showed me that there was a difference between hospitality and service.
Yes.
And I was like, holy shit, you can do something like that? You can say something like that in a fine dining restaurant like this?
And you talked about that too. I love that concept of hospitality in general, and it goes to any industry is what I always feel like. It's perfect for restaurants, but you can translate it to so many different businesses of what builds trust. I think you've talked about that. It amazes me, and I remember the first time going to a restaurant and they knew my name when I was walking in the door. Like, how did they know my name? And I think you were talking about that now with Open Table. There's ways. And even on the Bear, everyone's looking at the Instagrams and, someone of note in that one scene where it's the teachers that have saved up and they looked on their Instagram. They've been saving up for months and then they gave them the check for free. Like, gives me chills.
Yeah, we get the ability to have these cameo moments in people's lives to where we can like completely change the temperature of the scene that we're walking in if you're paying attention. And I've had a million moments over the years where you overhear something or you see something. Will Guidara is one of my best friends, and he's become famous for doing stuff like that. He owned 11 Madison Park, which is the #1 restaurant in the world. And the first time I ever dined there was the first time my partner and I were ever nominated for a James Beard Award. This was in 2010, and I had walked into that restaurant, and as soon as I walked in the door, they were like, "Mr. Boehm, nice to see you. And you brought Courtney with you, and you're with Rob and his wife Kathleen, and come right this way." And at the end of the meal, I had said to her, I was like, "Hey, I have a question for you." I was like, "You pronounce my name correctly. Nobody does that." I said, "How did you know?"
Unless they listen to some of the podcasts.
There you go.
I would have said it correctly.
There you go. Well done. And she said, I was a little stuck on your name, so I called BOKA 30 minutes before you came to make sure that I got it right. And I was like, damn it, that's good.
That's good.
I was like, so in building this kind of Frankenstein that was who I was as a restaurant owner and a maitre d' and all of those things, that was like one of these pieces, like we have to be good CIA agents.
Yes.
Because then the more we know about people, and it can even be subtle.
Yes.
It could be seating.
The subtler, the better.
Yeah, it could be seating a server with a guest because they're both from the same hometown. But sometimes really, big things happen. Mm-hmm. And very recently I got an email from someone who had said, "Hey, for the past 14 years, we've gone to BOKA, my father and I." And he goes, "Every year we come in there and we drink martinis, and we have appetizers." And she said, "My father passed away. This will be the first year I'm coming in without him, but I'm still going to come and have a martini. Just want to thank you for all the great hospitality over the years." And so instantly I was like, "Oh, here we go.
Right.
This is it." So we went and we got martini glasses made that had her father's name etched in them. And then we changed the cocktail menu for that night to say Seymour's Martini, because that was the father's name. We framed the martini menu. And then we sat a place for him and still poured a martini for him as well.
That just is another chill moment. Oh, that is. And it's, what did that cost you? Not much.
Nothing.
Right?
It was honestly a little bit of time. But
totally the thought of it and naming something after someone is legacy stuff.
You're also doing it for you.
Oh, yeah.
Any job can get monotonous if you just are doing it in the same way every single day and repetition, all that sort of stuff. What I always say to everybody, I was like, the good stuff is in being creative. And you have creative license. We have standard operating procedures for stuff that we do. But stuff like that, this is where you get to use your mind and your creativity and have fun and all that sort of stuff.
Blank canvas. I absolutely love it. We're all over the place, but the Wendys story, you got it. That creativity and that hospitality is like one of my favorites.
I've been telling this. I tell the same story at every opening that I've ever gone. In 1997, I was on my way from Springfield, Illinois, my hometown, to St. Louis. And my friend and I stopped off at a Wendys on the way, and we walked in. There was a woman at the front who was perched there just to greet guests, like, "Gentlemen, welcome to Wendys Hamburgers." And I was like, "Thank you.
That's the craziest
Thank
thing.
you, Joan."
Yes.
I appreciate it. And so I walked up to the front, and I'd never seen a maitre d' at a fast food restaurant before.
Never.
That's pretty tricky. Never. So we get up there, and the guy who was the cashier very enthusiastically told us about Dave's new spicy chicken sandwich. So fine, I'll get the spicy chicken sandwich. And they used to have the super bar back in the day, Wendys. I'd got
Best
the water.
salad bar ever.
Yeah, so I went by, and the woman who was greeting was also cleaning up the errant, romaine lettuce and penne pasta that got knocked off. And at one point, she came by and she refilled my water with a pitcher. And so at this point, I looked at the chef sitting across from me, and I just said, "What the hell's going on?"
We're in the Twilight Zone.
He's like, I don't know. I think we're maybe dining at the greatest fast food restaurant ever. And I'm like, is there cameras up here? What's happening right now? And so I was like, I go, there has to be, people are not doing this on their own. There has to be some sort of manager here who decided that he wanted to bend this concept a little bit. Mm-hmm. And we started talking about cover versions. And I remember I was talking about, the Beatles were the standard bearer for everything they'd ever done until with a little help from my friends. And then Joe Cocker redid it. It didn't even sound like the same song. And I'm like, this guy's playing a different song.
Yep.
And so we went up and I go, could I see the manager, please? And he came out and they go, is there a problem, sir? I was like, no, there's no problem. He comes out. On the contrary. And I just said, hey, I just want to let you know, you have an amazingly run Wendys restaurant. And he's like, well, as you can see, we're very proud of it. And they had won the best Wendys in America, like the Golden Wendys Award or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, wow, my God, that's so good.
Is it still there? Do you know? Like,
I don't know. I think it is. I don't think it's the same manager. Whatever that manager's doing, he's killing
that
it.
Just goes to show how leadership, sets the tone and the culture and the expectation. Like,
totally. So I was so inspired by that to go back to my little restaurant in Springfield at the time and to keep bending things. And that's still the same way I think about concepts, which is like, what are the core competencies that we have to do to be X, to be a steakhouse, to be a Japanese restaurant? And what are the ways where we can be creative and make it new and make it fresh and make it interesting? And so every time out, we try to do that. At Swift & Sons, we have a magician that works the floor, and the magician is on the menu.
We're going there on Wednesday, which I know I invited you to, and you're not, but yes.
Thank you.
Yes. So we're going to be looking for the magician.
Get some magic and bring it by the table. And so
I want to look for Easter eggs too.
There you go. Look for Easter eggs.
That is, and I think that your uniqueness about the way that you run your restaurants, hospitality, of course, food, of course, but you talk so much about design, sound. Sound is huge, and depends on what vibe you want.
Yes.
If you can't even have a conversation at a table, it
can be too quiet. If there's too much sound intonation, but you want to be able to have a conversation. I always said, if you're at a 12 top and you can hear every lyric, but you can also hear the person at the end of the table, then that's perfect sound.
Right.
That's really hard to come by. You have to have great sound equipment. You have to have a lot of speakers.
And it must have to change throughout the night, depending on how many people are in the restaurant or not.
It changes. And so, that's, you're always trying to get perfect everything, which is impossible, but we try to get as close as possible.
And I think that the design is very unique. And I read about a lot of yours, and just that you change it up every once in a while too, to keep it interesting. And I think that's so true of, being a constant learner and really continuing that creativity and learning from places like Wendys.
Well, BOKA's been open 21 years. We've changed the design completely 3 times. Last time we gutted it and spent more on it than we did the first time. That was about 10 years ago now, but.
Okay, let's go back. So we'll go back to Florida so we can at least get to Chicago. Let's get to Chicago.
So I'm saving up this money. One day I quit, and Teresa, my girlfriend at the time, my first business partner, and we opened up a little 6-table restaurant called the Lazy Days Cafe in Seaside, Florida. Very first service, the oven blew up in my face, caught my hair on fire.
No, God.
So my career did not start out that
Was it a pilot light?
well.
What was it?
Pilot light had gone out.
Yeah.
So when the stove had been delivered, they had to lift it up, and when they pounded it down, it shifted that bottom plate of that oven. And so we turned the oven on because we were just going to warm bread in there. And pilot light had gone out, gas is swirling around, opened it up. One of the eyes is up there, a spark goes down and hits it, and poof, right in my face.
Scary.
So scary. So, I had like really long hair at the time. I did not have long hair anymore. It actually saved me.
You still have great hair though.
I had this, my second day of service, scabbed face and a shaved head.
Nice.
Not my favorite look. But that's how it all started. Got better from there. And that was 39 restaurants ago.
Wow.
But that's where I cut my teeth, and that's really where hard work kicked my ass and shaped me. Because in the beginning we did breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and it was a long day, and it's the only thing I had going on in my life, which at the beginning was enough. Just having my own restaurant was so much adrenaline, but the adrenaline wears off at a certain point, and it's kind of like anesthesia wearing off. You're in the middle of surgery, you're butterflied open, and then one day you wake up and you're like, holy shit, this is hard. I maybe didn't design this correctly.
Yes.
So we stopped doing breakfast after a while. We closed on Sundays. We tried to figure out how to have a life without killing ourselves. And then I was like, okay, this is too small of a restaurant.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't open up a restaurant with your girlfriend. So I learned little things.
So then you went and opened one with your mom.
Well, before I did that, I opened up a second restaurant down there, which was, I was like, what are my favorite things? Wine, sushi, and rock and roll.
Perfect.
And I opened up this 100 Wines by the Glass, sushi till 2:00 in the morning, and live rock and roll 7 nights a week. And we just killed it. And that was called the Indigo Wine Bar. And so I was getting my like bachelor's and master's, opening up these small places and like taking real chances and learning a lot about myself. And so when I sold that, that's when I went to Springfield and said, Mom, quit your job.
We're going to do a restaurant together.
We're going to do a restaurant together. And I knew a lot about my mom. I knew enough about my mom to know she would be an awesome partner, and she was.
Good. And I'm sure she loved to cook or was a great chef or...
She didn't cook. You know, her job in the beginning was like, I had these grand ideas about design, and she was the one who could make them real. And so one of the stories is like, I loved this artist, George Rodrig in New Orleans, who painted these blue dogs. And I'd seen real blue dogs in a restaurant once. And I was like, Mom, could you paint this? And she copied it perfectly. And I'm like, great, I need 17 of them. Wow. And so
Can you paint? Do you?
No.
That blows my mind. I can't
So
either.
everything was like, found an antique bar at this little antique shop called Punky's Palace, but it needed some work. And I was like, we can refinish this, right? And she's like, sure. So, and I was like, there were these massive windows inside the restaurant in Springfield, and they overlooked a terrible looking movie theater, you know, this big parking lot. And I was like, what if we framed canvases inside the window and drilled them in? And then you painted these massive blue dogs in the windows. Okay, I can do that. So I would have these big ideas and she would make them real.
Oh, that's perfect.
You know, she was MacGyver.
So you're the visionary.
I was the artist and she was MacGyver. And you know, so I learned a lot. Like, we bought all these antique chairs, and I was like, she's like, okay, we're gonna have these all delivered to your apartment, and we're gonna turn your apartment into to a chair manufacturing building. And so we like glued them together. We built new seat covers for them, and
probably painted them. Maybe
we painted it. It was a do-it-yourself project from beginning to end.
How long did you have that one?
It's been open for 27 years. I owned it for 2.
Wow.
But it's still
that
open.
That was a kind of a quick turn.
Well, it was Springfield, Illinois, and I didn't want to live there for forever. The idea was, I'm going to keep it going, then I'm going to move somewhere else. And somebody had made me a good offer on it. And I was just like,
And I would imagine it's hard, and I kind of know this from my ex-husband had 15 restaurants in England and Scotland.
Yeah.
And his vision was to do that and move here. But it's hard to trust and leave, isn't it? You know, for someone else to run it.
It's a skill set, one that I didn't have yet. So it was a blessing. And, you know, and then I went to Nashville, and I had done well, and I opened up a really big restaurant. And that's probably the best thing that ever happened to me. You know, my mom said something that's probably pretty harsh, but she was like, you know, you'd had a lot of good things happen to you in a row. It was probably a good time for you to get kicked in the balls. And
don't we learn our biggest
thanks, Mom.
lessons? I mean, those are the ones that you go.
Yeah.
I feel like go back to and go, I needed that lesson.
If you can be a good detective about your own life, which most people can't. They want to, like, even me coming out of it, I wanted to blame it on a million people, but the buck stopped with me. And I went, and I mean, listen, a lot of crazy things. You know, opening night of that restaurant, you know, Trisha Yearwood sang, and George Strait was calling me personally that day to ask if he could get in because we were sold out already. I mean, it was this star-studded bash. Every Nashville news camera had done a story on it because we were the first person in the Gulch. I thought my ship had come in. I was like, oh, well, this is it. This is what I was destined for. And instead, I didn't know how to run a restaurant that big. And I fell flat on my face.
I think this is a perfect story because it happens to all of us. But so what was your biggest takeaway when you finally could have some self-awareness on that one?
Well, first of all,
Too big, too fast.
My middle-class sensibility is a part of what helped me succeed those first 3 restaurants. So I'd been a student the whole time, and I was learning, and I knew not to jump off the cliff yet. Do stuff that you can pull off. Nashville was 10,000 square feet, 250 seats.
You had to let go of control.
125 employees, and I had to let other people manage those managers. I couldn't wrap my arms around everything. And at every turn, I was kind of screwing it up and encountering a bunch of stuff I didn't know.
And managing managers is huge. Hugely different. It's hugely different.
It is.
I'm just stepping into a role of, I hired a president, and for the first time kind of backing off and managing a president. This is new, uncharted territory for me too, and it's different.
If you don't know your guiding principles and
your values
and your non-negotiables, I didn't know any of that stuff.
And I think some of them, do you feel like some of them you learn as you walk through it together though?
Well, I had to go through all. I came out of that scared straight because when I got to Chicago, not only was I opening up a restaurant, but I was having a baby at the same time. And so now it was like, you mentioned being courageous before. Now I had higher stakes. Now it was truly courageous to open up a restaurant because now I had 2 people that I was supporting, and I was scared out of my mind.
And I love the story of how you met your partner. So you got to talk a little bit because that was right around this time then, right?
Yeah. So worst time in my life. I'm in Chicago with my tail between my legs. I had 2 meetings here in Chicago. One was with Michael Cornick, who I know that owned MK here in town, and one was with Rob Katz, who became my business partner. And we had 15 minutes blocked out, and we went to Nookie's on Wells. We had a cup of coffee, and 15 minutes turned into 4 hours.
Wow.
And it was one of those moments in life where you were just like, okay, no matter what, me and this guy are going to be friends. We laughed at the same stuff, and
do you ever feel like knew him in another life kind of
guys,
thing?
But he was, he'd been in the bar business, so he didn't know the restaurant business like I did. But he was also he was 5 years older than me, but he might as well have been 20 years older than me. He was slick and understood the city and knew how to maneuver it. And a lot of the stuff that I needed, he had, and a lot of the stuff that he needed, I had.
Perfect.
And we just knew it. And one of us turned to the other, we're not sure who, and said, what's the worst that could happen? Let's open a restaurant together.
I love that saying. What's the worst that can happen?
What's the worst that
can happen? It's gotten me in trouble a few times.
Yeah. But it turned into, one of the great friendships and partnerships in my life.
Yeah.
And that first restaurant ended up being BOKA that's still around. So that cup of coffee was 23 years ago.
That's beautiful.
And the hardest part was that year it took to even find a building where, and I bartended till 5 o'clock in the morning, and for that year, and I had to eat a lot of humble pie and swallow my pride and go back to the beginning and become a student again and figure out how this wasn't going to happen again. And that whole year, I just was chomping at the bit to get back into the game. It's like I was an athlete whose last game on the court was a disaster. And I was like, I can play. I know I can play. Just get me back out there again. And so by the time BOKA opened, it was like giving me a huge drink of water after being in the desert.
But you probably had great energy around it. Going through that made you more grateful.
I was totally grateful, and I was going to will the success of that restaurant. I stood at the front door 6 nights a week.
For many years, it sounds like.
For many years. And that... Every time I walk into that restaurant, I look at that front door because, and I've gotten emotional about it before because, that moment in my life, having my daughter, Sophia, and that's the moment that really shaped my life. And I was like, who am I?
Yeah.
Did I just get lucky before, or is this real? And at the same time, I was in Chicago. So it was like, okay, not that Nashville was the minor leagues, it wasn't, but I just played in a smaller market and didn't hit very well. And now I'm facing tougher pitchers. And I was like, what am I made of? During that time, I went and saw one of my friend's moms that I grew up with, who had been kind of a mentor to me. And I had just told her how miserable and depressed I was. And she gave me this lecture about, I'm not worried about you, and I always know you're going to be fine. And opening night of that restaurant, she walked in and she put both her hands on my face. She's passed away now, so Beverly Kriegler was her name. And she walked in the door and she goes, "Now look who had a comeback in him." And so I was lucky to have.
That makes me teary. That's a good one. That was good.
Beverly was so sweet.
And that there are comeback games. Love that.
Yeah, everybody loves a comeback, especially the person that just failed.
Yeah, and you're stronger for it usually. And sacrifices is one thing that I wrote down a lot reading about you, of having dinner in the car with Sophia and, like just trying to find that time to be a dad. Like, talk a little bit about some of the major sacrifices that you had to make.
Yeah, I mean, the problem was, okay, here I am, a new business partner trying to prove myself to my new partner and to a new city and to my new staff, but I'm also a new partner to somebody, to Courtney, and a father to a new daughter. And so the problem with those days was I had a lot of guilt because wherever I was guilty. I wasn't in the other place. And so I was running hard and running scared. And it was a lot. Yeah. But you brought up family meal, restaurants have a kind of a ritual where you come in and you have comida together, you have family meal together, and you eat, and then you set the restaurant up, and then you have these 30 minutes before you open that's called Preshift. And, my comida was not with the staff, it was with my daughter. Yeah. And my girlfriend at the time. Couldn't
they come out of the car and come into the restaurant? But did you feel like you wanted?
I felt like I wanted to keep that professional, and so we would sit out behind BOKA by the dumpsters, and that was my time. And
you had to be creative,
Yeah, and then I loved that 30 minutes of level set before we did a restaurant too. Preshift was my time to not just talk about who was coming in that night and what we were serving, but we talked about world events and we talked about emotional things. We talked about how to get ourselves emotionally set for customers and what we did when the inevitable bad person walked in our stores. And so we had these great conversations, because really the idea of that is to fill the cup up of people before they go out on the floor. So I never wanted to leave Preshift being, being the Gordon Ramsay, be like, "What's the matter with you fucking people?"
Right.
It wasn't that. It was about saying, "Hey, we're going to go out there tonight.
We got this.
And we got this. And it's us against the world." My restaurant in Springfield, I remember making a really cheesy radio ad before we opened. And at the end of it, I was the voiceover in it. And the end of it was like, "Indigo Restaurant, bringing the world to Springfield." It's so silly, but
I hate voiceovers, quite frankly, as this team knows.
But that was my idea to everybody. It was like, "Hey, this is not just BOKA Restaurant. This is our own little country. This is our own little city. We have our own language. We decide who lives and works inside of here. We're good to each other, and that trickles down to everybody else who comes in here." And that's how I treated it.
It kind of goes back to the very beginning when you were saying you found your people, you found your home, and these
were my communities.
Yeah, that's huge. And its culture is truly what is. And again, it's I think of those kind of things, even in the intensity of my world is nowhere near yours, but there's moments where the team has to really rally. And I love the thought of filling the cup before the doors open. That's huge.
Yeah, I grew up in a kind of a sad house. Yeah. And the idea for my restaurants were to be
a happy
this
house.
Replacement for that sad house.
That's really kind of a deep thought. I get that. And there's a saying that I've always held true, the family system is only as sick as the secrets that we keep. And I share that with my boys all the time. We are not keeping secrets. This house is no secrets. It's a big thing.
There are plenty of secrets in my house, and I wrote a book that comes out next year. So I'm not gonna tell the big secret, but it was a strange childhood for me. So the restaurant business saved my life.
There's
no, and I really mean that. It like truly saved my life.
Yeah.
It was something that I could direct a lot of negative energy I had and turn it into positive energy. And all those families that I had at those restaurants in those early days really were like my families. I could tell you every opening staff of like the first 10 restaurants that I
so
had,
cool.
because I was in the foxhole with all those people.
Right. And knowing their stories, and I know you're big, I agree with you so much on storytelling. But before we go, I'd love to hear, because I feel similarly, very much community and family at my company too. Tell me about some disappointments though with that, where you'd been let down.
Yeah, well, I was one of the most trusting people ever. My first employee ever, took my car and drove it to Panama City without my permission and hit somebody head on and totaled my car.
Wow.
And so I learned the hard way, with a lot of people that I worked with over time that that the trust was going to be earned. And cause I was so ready to love everybody and to have everybody love you.
Right.
And, this is going to come off cynical. I don't want it to be, but a lot of young people have this belief that everybody's going to root for them. Right. And then be happy for them when it succeeds. And that's not always true. So
I'm sure you deal with a lot of envy and jealousy.
But I'm glad I entered my life in a really open, free way. And I still feel I'm not a cynic, but I know the people that I love and the people that love me. I actually have a document on my phone. In my notes section of my phone is the list of people that I love and who loves me.
That's a great
idea.
And
that is my level set for anything that happens that emotionally moves me that shouldn't move me. Like something happens, you're like, why am I so worked up about this? You go to that and that just sets me. Here's these people. That's the most important things I have in my life are these relationships.
On that note of the people on that list, gathering, creating community around the table, and even back to your childhood and really wanting to create, more inclusion and more of, it feels like that more belonging to me. So it sounds like a lot of where you're going, but you have some great ideas on how to create good gatherings. I think these gatherings could be work gatherings or personal gatherings what's important? I love gatherings.
I love throwing parties like that, at my own house. I had a great Christmas party, and first of all, the curation of the group of people that you have in there, that's an art. It's
I don't know it, so talk more about.
Well, it's kind of like Steve Rubell at Studio 54 was like, he's like, you can't have too much of one thing.
Right.
You need to have a little bit of everything. And so when I threw my holiday party this year, it wasn't my 20 best friends. I invited some people that I hadn't seen in a while, or some people that I thought might be interesting for the party. But I found a historical quote for all 20 people who came that I thought applied to them in some way. So at every place setting was their name, and on the back of it was a historical quote. So at the beginning of that dinner party, I was like, if everybody looks on the back of theirs, I found a historical quote that I think might mean something to you, and to me it says something about you. So as we go throughout the dinner, I'm going to choose someone, and they tell me if I'm off base or if they think it does apply to them.
So how'd you do?
I did really well.
I would imagine.
I did really well, and I think a lot of people have kept them or shown me that the quote's still sitting on their desk. Huh. But I throw Jeffersonian dinners too, which is the rules are there's only one conversation the whole dinner, and so there's no side conversations. And two, everybody has a piece of paper.
It's hard to manage, quite frankly.
It is.
Do you have to get a whip out there?
I say at the very beginning, I stand up, I go, hey, here's the deal, guys. This is based on Thomas Jefferson's early dinner parties that he used to throw, and their topics were much more heavy than the topics we're going to talk about today. It was the beginning of our country. But I go, I'm going to have one universal question, and we're all going to answer it. And then everybody's got a card, and it's face down. Throughout dinner, I'm going to have somebody flip a card over, and it's going to have something, a conversation piece or something you can answer, and then you'll talk about it, and we'll all kind of discuss it. Okay. So the first one I ever threw, I stood up and I said, who's the greatest teacher of your life? And I told mine, and then the best answer that I've ever heard in my entire life, there was a 75-year-old woman there, and she goes, my answer is my 3 husbands.
Huh.
She said, my first husband died in the war. She said, he taught me how to love. He was the love of my life. She goes, my second husband, who died of cancer, she said, taught me how to travel. We traveled the world together. We had adventures together. She goes, my third husband taught me the love of food. We ate at all the Michelin 3-star restaurants in the world, and he taught me how to cook. She goes, they were my 3 teachers.
Wow.
And I just thought that was such an amazing answer. But like,
that is really good.
So the pre-writing,
like it's eat, pray, love, kind of.
It is, yeah. The pre-writing of those questions, I use the Proust questionnaire a lot. And Marcel Proust said, if you answer these 20 questions, he had the belief that it would tell somebody's true quality by all the answers to those questions. And the questions are like, what do you consider the lowest depth of misery? And what trait do you most admire in your friends? And when and where were you happiest? And what is your favorite journey?
Those.
And what's your favorite word?
And I don't know if you've seen these out on like Instagram or what have you, but we'll probably be doing these in the after show with you because I love them. But I love doing this to my kids too. And like, yeah, we love games but yeah, the questions they are deep. It's that
conversation starters.
Is it that one? What's the name of the one that we have? Yeah, Esther Perel. Oh, she's cool. Talk about therapist. So Kevin, tell me about that really difficult time around COVID, which was difficult for all of us. But what kind of awakening you had during that time?
I mean, I've been a manic depressive my whole life, even though even 10 years ago, I wouldn't have. If you had asked me if I was a manic depressive, I would have said no.
So what kind of triggered you to know that you were? Because your mom, you said your mom
My
suffered.
mom was a manic depressive, for sure. For me, nobody would have guessed that because I was so good at building this avatar that was this guy that seemed like he was having the time of his life all the time.
Right.
And I so didn't want to be that person that I would have told you, absolutely not. And so I mistook manic moments for happy moments. Why does this kid from Springfield, Illinois, end up opening, 40 restaurants and constantly working on new projects? That was my opiate, was this adrenaline rush I would get from these things. They would make me feel better, and then I would crash, and I would do it again. So I did that for a long, long time, and I navigated it, and I had a lot of great moments within that, but I had a lot of crashes, and so.
And what would a crash look like? Just really tired? Like, I mean.
It just was like, they're pretty dark crashes.
Yeah.
And it was like,
hard to get out of
so hard to get out of bed, but I would.
Yeah.
And it was like, when I would have to go into a dining room and I would, act like I was happy all night, it would take every ounce of energy I had to get through a night like that. And at the end of the night, I just would go home and I just would not want to talk to anybody. And
that sounds really hard. And you were even saying that you could tell like your voice would change, I think. And like, I get that of like when you're not in alignment,
The avatar me was like this completely different person, even with a different voice. Like I'd get into the dining room and be like, "Hi, welcome to the restaurant." It'd be like another pitch higher, and like it was like, I mean, the whole thing was just like kind of dumb.
And it's interesting because you talk too, and I think it's so true that Chicagoans can tell bullshit from a mile away, or that we
They were a really good bullshit actor, but I was really good
at
it.
I was a really good actor, though.
I was really good at hiding it. And I didn't even know that I was hiding it. Right. I had created an avatar and I didn't even realize it. And so never had a therapist, never was medicated or anything like that. And then a lot of stuff happened at once. The day before we had to shut down restaurants, my mom died. My mom was really my one true parent my whole life.
Right. Probably your biggest cheerleader?
My biggest cheerleader. And I went from being bedside with her for 2 weeks and her passing away to driving to Chicago and shutting down all the restaurants and furloughing all the employees.
I can't even imagine.
And then about 4 or 5 months after that, we had maxed out our lines of credit. I had one restaurant that we paid $2 million a year in rent. Another we paid $1 million a year in rent. A restaurant in Los Angeles that we were building that they were still charging us full rent. And I built Beyond, a private club, and we weren't even able to have people inside of it.
So just cash flow going out, nothing coming in.
So I kind of looked at it and was like, well, my mom, one of my stabilizing forces in my life, is gone. I might be completely bankrupt in a few months. And I was drinking too much. I was just terribly despondent and depressed. And, I had a lot of suicidal moments in late 20, early 21. And didn't feel connected to anything in the world.
And you weren't alone, There were
yeah.
so many.
There was a lot of people out there doing that. And I decided, I had gone and done this hiking trip in California a few times. It's called the Ranch at Live Oak. It's this really difficult hiking trip, and it's 12 to 15 miles and a day of hiking. And I was like, I'm going to go there and it's going to reset me. And I wasn't that healthy at the time. And I went, first day I hiked 14 miles. Second day, got to mile 10, collapsed on the mountain.
Oof. Heat
exhaustion, had to get carried off the mountain, medical help. They sent me home. I got back home and I was even worse off than I was before. And it was this moment in life where, rock bottom is a blessing. If you've ever listened to Dax Shepard before, the beginning of his Alcoholics Anonymous book that sits bedside has the 35 times he thought he hit rock bottom.
Wow, no, I did not know that.
An actual rock bottom was a day where he lost like 8 days. He did so many drugs and drank so much that 8 days just disappeared. And he was like, oh shit, I'm in real trouble. And I had a moment in my life when I was in California where I was like, I'm in real trouble. And off of that, I got a therapist who wisely at the very beginning said, this whole like getting to know period of having a therapist,
yes,
let's fast track it. Yeah. And we spent a lot of time together over a few weeks. That, medication, stopped drinking, did ayahuasca, went to the Hoffman Institute. Yeah. I drew the kitchen sink at finding my way in the world, maybe for the first time, really. And came out of it a completely different person. People talk about introvert, extrovert a lot. Those things are really where you get your energy,
right?
Not what you're good at.
Right.
I'm good at being extroverted. You can throw me into any situation where I have to get on stage or be in a dining room or be in a party of 1,000 people. I can excel at those moments. Really, I get my energy from being by myself. And I turned the volume really way low on my life for a period of about 6 months where I kind of disappeared for the first time. And probably the most important 6 months of my life.
Right. You needed to.
I needed to do it. And I've learned a lot about myself. Miles Davis has one of my favorite quotes, which is, it took me a long time to learn to play like myself. And it did. It took me,
and like,
it took me 50 years.
Yeah. And still learning. I mean, I'd say personally. You talked about when Girl and the Goat won the Best Restaurant in the Nation award, I believe.
It was Savour magazine put it on the cover. It was the best new restaurant in America.
Yeah, that was huge. And then you talked about imposter syndrome and kind of circles around this to me.
Yeah.
Of, I like your theory on. So what do you do with imposter syndrome when it hits you?
Well, I mean, I had imposter syndrome for a long, long time, and it's when the whole Girl and the Goat thing happened, which was a whole nother stratosphere from anything that I'd ever seen before. I don't know if there's any response, but imposter syndrome when something like that happens, like, it's everything that you ever wanted before, that like, oh, we're doing 600 dinners a night and another 1,000 people want to dine every single night.
And we've grown 10 years in a row. What
the hell is this all about? And so getting your brain wrapped around, do I deserve this? Have I done enough? Am I smart enough? All of those things.
Am I worthy?
Am I worthy?
Am I worthy?
It's hard for most people just to sit and accept it and enjoy it and be a part of it and be in it. And I could be, which I can now. But there was a long time where you just constantly waking up, and that wake up and panic in the morning I can't look at certain like times of my life and pictures of my life because it just kind of makes me sad.
Yeah. Well,
you know,
but it makes you who you are.
Yeah.
Then.
I know what's behind some of the smiles and some of those pictures and stuff.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Fortunately,
me too.
And fortunately, it's real now.
And I think you're like, there was something I read about like imposter syndrome and using it as fuel and to keep striving to that goal and that sooner or later that foundation goes from sand to stone. I loved that quote. Like, and it might ebb and flow. Like you might feel like you're on stone and then you move to another learning moment in your life and there goes the sand again.
Impostor syndrome has a lot to do with the inner narrator in our heads.
I agree, yes.
And so most people think that voice inside their heads is one voice. It's actually four. So if you think of it in terms of your body, your intellect, your emotional child, and your spiritual self, like most ambitious people wake up in the morning and they're like, oh shit, I have all this stuff to do, but I really need to get to the gym. And you know what? God, I haven't been out in weeks. I need to go out. And then there's this, this spiritual part, which is like, and what does it all mean? And so those four voices, people, are usually fighting with each other, and people think of it as one voice. If you can think of those four things as real people, if you think of your intellect as you in your suit or in whatever you wear to work,
right.
If you think of your body as you in your workout gear, as your emotional child as you at 12 years old, and your spiritual self as you is kind of like take the best picture of you that you love the most, and then put light through your hair and fingers like
it's the angel card.
It's like angel part of you. And you think of
it's that little child one that gets me every time.
Yes,
that's the one that trips me up.
That
12-year-old, she's a bitch.
If you think, well, you got to think of them as four people in a huddle that are empathetic towards each other. So if there's one voice coming out and saying, God, we really need to get to the gym. And they're like, go to the gym. It's okay.
Yeah, right.
Work will be there.
Yeah.
Go ahead and do it.
And what needs the most attention on that, and to even wake up slowly and feel that and not jump out of your bed, Talk about, so during this we're still in the same realm, and you decided you had to make some changes on those kind of, delegating. Like, how did you go about saying, okay, I'm going to delegate some of this stuff because I don't need to be doing everything for BOKA?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to grow a company in any good way, you have to go from being a great doer to being a great teacher.
Yeah.
And, for a long time, I wasn't a great teacher. And you have to take all that stuff that's inside your brain and either get it down on paper or figure out how to deliver those messages.
Tell stories. You're an amazing storyteller.
Tell stories. Telling stories is the best way to get points across.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories that I tell all my managers all the time is that I had a very good friend, a great actor named Michael Ealy, who was in a play in New York City. Who it was called Joe Fearless, and the stage was at a man's apartment and him playing basketball on a basketball court. And they actually, when you walked into the theater, there was no curtain going up. They were already doing choreographed dunks and layups and stuff before the play started. And while he was warming up, he noticed that Philip Seymour Hoffman sat in the front row. Ooh. And it was his favorite actor. He's like, holy shit, PSH is here. And so at the end of the play, Michael gets the ball from 12 feet out. He shoots a jump shot. The man in the apartment supposedly bet like $1 million in the game, and he freaks out. The play ends, everybody cheers, and the curtain comes down. Michael goes back, he changes clothes, he goes out the side door, and Philip Seymour Hoffman's leaned up against a pole, and he goes, what happens if you miss it? And he goes, it's a different ending. He goes, what's the other ending? He goes, you got to come on a night when I miss it. And I tell that story because I was like, guys, they wrote different endings to the play. We write multiple endings to whatever's going to happen. So think about in this space, everything that can happen on any given night.
Yeah.
It's Friday night and it rains, so it pushes your whole book back a half hour.
Yep.
What are the hospitality things that you're going to do for all those people that are waiting at the bar 40 minutes past their reservation? Know what you're going to do. The woman at table 43 has the best meal of her life. She catches her hair on fire on the candle. What are you going to do in both?
Yep.
What's your move? Mm-hmm. And so this multiple script writing is one of the things that I teach, and it's a hard thing to teach. It's people, you want them to be intuitive, but they also have to think about what all these moves that they have and all these things they have in their arsenal before they do it. Right. And so I've figured out how to be a better teacher over the years.
Yeah, and I think you guys probably just, in hospitality have so many, I'm thinking of the bear again, but of like so many different stories. And one where there was, you were talking about a man who brought in a bottle of wine and it was corked and felt very much like a bear moment, and you have to like run.
That's probably I mean, as a young guy too, probably my best hospitality move ever. Like a guy walked into, had rented out one of my my second restaurant. And his father had given him a 1961 Chateau Lafite on his wedding anniversary, 25 years before. And the father had now passed away. And so they brought the bottle in, and the invitation even was a sketch of the bottle. And it represented the father being at the party. Mm-hmm. So he came in a little bit early for me to decant it, and I went to decant it, and it was corked, and the man cried in front of me. And I just said, hey, man, you and I are the only two people that know this bottle is corked. Why don't I replace it with something? And he was like, no, these people are way too wine savvy. They're going to know that 97 Silver Oak is not this Lafite. And I was like, wait a second. I know a guy who's a huge wine cellar, and he's like 85 years old, and he's the biggest romantic. And I called him up, and Bob was like, come down here. I got a 66. It's not a 61, but
close enough. No one will know.
Close enough. And, I was like, how much? He's like, bring me $100. Wow. I mean, it was like, it was a $2,500 bottle of wine. 61 Lafite was like a $6,000 bottle of wine.
Wow.
And so I went and grabbed it, and we served that bottle of wine, and we poured the 66, we threw it out, we rinsed out the bottle of 61, and he gave this beautiful speech about his dad, and everybody was crying, and they were trying the wine, and they were all saying, this is the greatest wine I've ever had, and then there were like 2 ounces left, and he poured the 2 ounces for me, Italian guy, and he came up and he kissed me on both sides of my cheeks, and he whispered in my ear, he goes, you're a beautiful liar, young man.
I love that. And it started from the lie after the amusement park. You gotta know.
No, just every once in a while.
Once in a while, no, those are worthwhile lies. So, okay, I think that we're getting that in here, but the one last thing that we talked about a little bit earlier, but that Ernie Johnson. So
yeah.
So when you were talking about, really having that hard time in COVID, 6 months out, totally get it, and then you came back. It sounds like kind of ready to come back, and your cup was full again.
Ernie Johnson talks about what he gets to do and what you got to do.
Yes.
And sometimes those got to do's get you to the get to do.
Uh-huh.
I've had so many beautiful things in my life that I've been able to get to do that I loved, and I stopped doing a lot of those things. And when we opened in New York, we opened a great restaurant called Laser Wolf in New York. That's Chef Michael Solomonoff. It's in Brooklyn. It's in Williamsburg. And I went up there for the opening, and I ended up staying for a month and working service every night. And it had been a long time since I worked service that much. Mm-hmm. And there was a night where there were so many VIPs in there, and one of them was Ruth Reichl, and Ruth was the New York Times food critic when I opened up my first restaurant. And one of the things I did when I opened my first restaurant was I wanted to feel cool, so I got a New York Times subscription, and she was the reviewer at the time, and every week I would read her reviews. And to me, it was like science fiction. It was like I was reading about restaurants I probably was never going to go to, and in a world I was never going to compete in, and I was fascinated by them. Mm-hmm. And I even framed one of her reviews that I loved, and I put it on the wall in my office. And so she was dining there that night.
So why did you love that review, though? Was it you wanted to aspire to?
It was funny. It was cool. I loved how she spoke about the restaurant, and I ended up going to New York, and I ended up going to that restaurant.
Because of that review?
Because of that review. And the review was hysterical. So I walked up to her table, and I was like, Ruth, I got to tell you a story. I go, you're probably my number one person I've ever wanted to come into my restaurants, and here's why. And I was like, I have one of your restaurants reviewed. And she's like, why? I was like, just because I like it so much. And she's like, the woman next to me is moaning. That's the first line of the review. She remembered. I was like, that's it.
That's it.
And so at the end of the meal, she had told me, she's like, these might be the best French fries I've ever had in my entire life. There was this tahini ketchup. And so at the end of the meal, we do a different soft serve every night, and you get it gratis at the end of your meal. And I brought the fries back over for her to dip into
in the
the
soft serve. Oh, that's brilliant.
And so as I'm walking back through, after she's taken a bite of it, she grabbed me by the arm and she pulled me down and she goes, "This time it's me that's moaning."
Oh, that's beautiful.
Like, oh my
wow.
God. It was this beautiful full circle moment. And I was back and I was that 22-year-old kid again sitting on my back deck. And I was like, man, there's a lot of really beautiful things still left out there in the world. A lot of mysteries for me still yet to solve. A lot of learning to do.
And maybe getting back into service for a month grounded you. I feel like that was a really wise thing to do.
Well, I always ask people at interviews, do you really enjoy taking care of people?
Right.
And people always say yes, but you can tell by the answer if they really do or not. I really do actually like taking care of people. It's one of my favorite things. I love entertaining because I love showing people a good time.
Yeah.
So that still remains. A lot of things have changed about me over life, but that hasn't changed.
Yeah, and again, I think that you can't fake that stuff. It's in your being and has to be authentic. Like you, smiling eyes, or like it's that bullshit thing. People know if it's not for real.
Yeah.
So. Okay, Mr. Kevin Boehm. There you go.
Well done.
I would love to hear about the legacy that you would like to leave behind.
Part of it is what we just talked about, which is a legacy of service. We're in a very interesting time right now in the world. There's not a lot of love out there in the social media world, which seems to dominate our worlds now. Yeah. And it seems like we're constantly at odds with people. I've tried to create spaces where people love each other inside of them. That's what I was trying to do instead of the house that I grew up in. And so I think that's what I continue to do, is offer up spaces where people can commune and relate to each other.
Yeah.
As long as people still want to have friendships, as long as people still want to date each other, as long as people still want to have sex with each other, I'm still going to be in business.
Yeah, that's true. And just human connection too. I
connection.
I hear what you're saying, and we get so far away from that. But at the end of the day, if COVID didn't teach us anything, it's that we longed for that human connection. Yeah. I did.
Totally. And then the other legacy is I wrote a book. It's called The Bottomless Cup. It comes out next year on Abrams, and the book is a lot about depression and wellness and what happiness really means in life and what your currencies of success are, and understanding what they are and how you're going to get to happiness. And so I think I'm going to be doing as much of that the rest of my life and having conversations with people that are struggling with those sorts of things as I will talking about restaurants. And so I think that's the next chapter of my life.
I like that. And I think a book is such a labor of love, and you're hoping that the readers are going to walk away and learn something from your experience. Your experience, strength, and hope is what I kind of always like to, that you're giving that to the audience. Thank you so much, Kevin, for joining me. This was a great conversation, and I thoroughly enjoyed every minute of it.
This is great. I'll be back tomorrow.
Okay,
this is a good way to start
we'll
the day,
still be here. Same time, same place. That would be fantastic.